Welcome to supporting you through this uncharted territory. I'm Paul Elson Vining and I work for Labria. Now, Labria is a professional services company specialising in business process management, facilitated workshops and process mapping support. Taking us through this uncharted territory, we don't think of what we do in our day-to-day lives as being a process, but actually most things are. And through this session, we're going to walk through what is a process, why do we do it, what the hierarchy is of a process, and breaking processes down. Now, according to the International Organization for Standards, or known as ISO, the Quality Standard 2015 states that a process is a set of interrelated or interacting activities that turn inputs into outputs. Processes are also measurable or have unambiguous outcomes. They have an owner, and each task within a process may be supported by a checklist, a script, a template, or even a system. Why do we process map? What is the point of a process? Well, the purpose of the process is to achieve the same desired outcome every time, regardless of who does it and regardless of load. And what we mean by load is how many tasks they have to do rather than how many entries they have to put into the system. So why do people capture process? Well, there's a whole host of reasons, but one of the main reasons is to provide clarity to staff and customers. It helps identify who's responsible for a task. It identifies what the output of the process should be, and also can look at who receives the output of that process and what we do with it. It's also there to enable transfer of knowledge, be able to measure how good or indeed even how bad a process is, and to understand if you have any bottlenecks or single points of failure within a process and understand how they can improve. Now, the hierarchy of a process is something that's been discussed frequently, and it's something that we find customers really struggle with. So we've identified it into 4 key steps. Now, notice I've not shown this as a pyramid, but right at the top of the food chain are policies. These are effectively the business rules set by the senior leadership team, is the intent of how we're going to behave as an organisation. Notice a good policy will be fairly short and it shouldn't have any instruction or process maps or flowcharts on how to achieve that end. Underneath underneath the policy, we have processes. Now, these processes are the things that transform the inputs into the outputs. These are what you do, not necessarily how you do them. Under process, we have procedures. Procedures give more detailed instruction about how you control the process. They might be in the form of guidance notes and will support individual scenarios in greater detail. At the lowest level of detail, we have work instructions or standard operating procedures. These are the step-by-step instructions which will often contain things like screenshots, and they're ideal for training new staff. All of these should be used in conjunction with each other. Creating a process, but who are we creating it for? Now, in these times of unprecedented change, workers are displaced from their usual work environments, but businesses still need to continue operating, and knowing what work can be done and how remote workers can be managed is going to be key. This session is entitled Supporting You Through Our Uncharted Territory, and where there is no path mapped, we will need some basic structure to ensure that we get to the same destination. Going to look at a couple of processes, and these fall into two key areas. So line managers assigning work and the workers completing the work. There are many different ways of documenting a process, but at the heart of it, processes should be clear and easy to follow without having to use any kind of complex notation system. These systems may be useful for people like business analysts or system integrators, but for the general workforce, any form of complexity will be the enemy to understanding. These processes should, however, convey that each action, as I've said before, produces an output to show the purpose of the activity. We use a methodology called noun-verb. Noun-verb is very simple. We think about activities or tasks. These are the things that you do. So consider the how something is done. And to make sure that we have our naming conventions right across the process, if we ask the question of how do I, it should read correctly. So for example, how do I complete an assessment or perform an online training course? Organizations get no value from all of the activities their workers do. I'll say that again. Organizations have no value from the activities their workers do. Activities have a cost. The fact that I've spent 3 hours completing a time and attendance spreadsheet is irrelevant to the business. The thing that I really value is that completed time and attendance spreadsheet, and that is what we call the deliverables. So if we think about the deliverables as being the what, so imagine show me there for a deliverable. So you should be able to show me a completed time and attendance spreadsheet or a activity log or a job list. So it's important that we stick to our naming convention and our methodology, which starts with nouns, which are things that you use and produce, verbs are the things that you do, and nouns again, because that's what's produced by the activity. So if we look at the first simple process, and this is going to be one of our worker processes, the first thing to identify in any process is the start and end points, even before thinking about the main part. In this process, we're going to look at getting a worker set up to work from home. So in the current climate of an adverse event requiring home working, this process has been designed predominantly for people that wouldn't naturally work from home. So we have our trigger, which is our adverse event, and the process ends with our ongoing adverse event requiring further work assignment, so we're still in the midst of it, or we've successfully concluded with the worker being able to return to office-based working. I'm deliberately not using any BPM or business process management tools here. I'm using a simple application which allows me to put post-it notes on a virtual workspace so we can do this anywhere. So if we think about the process as we walk our way through, we can start identifying the activities. Now, in this particular case, my activities are identified in yellow. So the first thing I'm going to be doing there is identifying the remote working requirements, and we'll work with IT to get set up. Now this is the responsibility of the worker at the moment, but I haven't identified at this stage who's doing what task. Now the output of those requirements are going to be a list of things that will need to be resolved. So we have our internet access requirements, any kind of VPN access that we require to company networks, VPN being virtual private network, any telephone conferencing requirements such as Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting or any host of remote systems we can use, access requirement to appropriate tools and software. So if we use something like Citrix, or are the tools installed locally, can the worker access them? We're also going to identify how we're going to log on. So are we going to get provided with a company laptop, or are we going to use a bring your own device or a home PC? And we also need to take into consideration any security requirements there may be. Once we've got our infrastructure and our home working environment in place, we can then identify suitable tasks that can be conducted remotely. So this creates us a work package. Now I've used the term very generically. This could be anything from company accounts, personal accounts, to marketing information that we need to produce for campaigns, or project work. But effectively a work package is the list of work that we need to do. We then carry out the tasks and keep a log. Because we're working remotely, it's interesting to identify how long things are taking to do to make sure there is sufficient work to keep you going, or identify any bottlenecks or jams that you might have along the way. Just because you're working remotely, it doesn't mean to say you're alone. And it's important to provide updates via the telephone or email or video conferencing to ensure that the team know what's happening with the work that you conducted. It also will look to identify any issues other team members may have, or any work that you're waiting on or cannot complete due to one issue or another. So we'll have feedback on that work, and we'll make a quick assessment to see, is the adverse event ongoing? If it is ongoing, we will link that process back round to identify some further work that can be conducted remotely, and we can continue through this until the incident has been resolved and the worker can return to office-based working. So we've just created a worker process. Now this is a very simple high-level process at the moment. We would want to develop this further if we were going to put this into a real-life example. But just the same way as we've identified the start and end points for the worker process, we can now look to create the manager process. And they again have the same trigger. So they have an adverse event requiring home working. And at the end of their process is actually the worker feedback, and they are going to perform a number of steps throughout the process to maintain the relationship forwards. So if we look at the process now, it's very similar to the worker process, but from a different perspective. So because we're a manager, the first activity we're going to do is to ensure that the worker has home working set up as an environment, and we're going to get a confirmation email from that worker to make sure that they've spoken with IT, gone through any of the required assessments, legal compliance, software compliance, to be able to conduct business from that home environment. The next thing that the manager is going to do is check contracts for any restrictions or security constraints preventing home working. Now, if you're working in a secure environment, or if you have customers that deal with classified information, then you may not be able to do all of the tasks that you would normally be in a work environment or an office environment. So coming out of this activity then, we'll identify the list of tasks that are cleared to be worked on, but we'll also identify the list of tasks that are unable to be worked. And if we look at the unable to be worked section, we can then contact the stakeholders to obtain special dispensation for remote working. This may be that we can only do partial processing of data, or the work is actually blocked and on hold, and we may have to absorb a penalty for failing to meet service level agreements due to the current environment. So once the manager has a list of tasks cleared to be worked, they can then notify the worker of the permitted work that can be completed, and that will give them a work package then for completion. This links neatly into the worker process where they will actually conduct the work along the way. But what else does a manager have to do? So the manager is going to schedule daily stand-ups with the team, not just the individual worker, over the telephone or video calling, to ensure that we continue to maintain this working environment and identify who's doing what, when, where the blockers are, and where the interdependencies are. It's also important to schedule a weekly one-to-one with a worker twice a week to track progress. So this may be done on a Monday and a Friday, Monday being the planned work and the Friday being was the work completed. And we can gain a judgment of how well the worker is coping. Is the work that they're doing appropriate? And are they on track? It's very easy when there's nobody around you to focus on the things you would like to do rather than the things you need to do. And the manager then, from an overview point, will be managing this activity through to the closure of the adverse event. So this will go on looking for new tasks, resolving issues until we have closed the issue down. These are two very, very simple processes and could be created by anyone, anywhere, at any time without any specialist software. The hardest part of any process mapping exercise is identifying what the process is and who is responsible for each step. Joining these processes together, along with others, will start to add value so workers can then start to see where their output goes and what's done with it. There are a wide range of different ways in which organisations structure the work, but in these two basic examples we can see the processes can be created for different audiences. The next steps are to start identifying the upstream and downstream processes. For example, breaking the activity of assigning the work down further, you may have documents and forms that help identify the criteria for the work that's being selected. Once you've started to discover what the processes are, you can then look at a place to put them. The next workshop, we will showcase some free to use or nearly free to use software to help you stay on top of the work in these challenging times. And we'll open up to questions.